Hello and welcome to the Ignition Zone, your go-to podcast where we ignite ideas, spark transformation, and fuel the journey to unlocking Africa's economic potential. I am your host, Matebe Zobo, and I'm so excited to take you on this incredible adventure into the world of economic development, entrepreneurship, and career growth. Today, we're diving into Nigeria's economic landscape from the role of micro, small, and medium enterprises, MSMEs, in job creation and in terms of how financial institutions can drive inclusive growth. Our guest today is Prof. Joseph Nnanna, the Chief Economist at the Development Bank of Nigeria, a key player in financing and de-risking lending for Nigeria's entrepreneurs, small businesses, and growing industries. Prof. Nnanna, thank you so much for honoring the invitation and welcome to the Ignition Zone podcast.
Happy to be here.
Great. And let's just start off by setting the scene, right? I mean, you operate in Nigeria, and we know that Nigeria is one of Africa's largest economies, but it also faces significant challenges, right? So we know of a very high inflation environment, exchange rate volatility, high unemployment, and a constrained business environment. From your perspective as an economist, what are the most pressing macroeconomic challenges facing Nigeria, and how do you think that Nigeria has been able to navigate those challenges today?
That's a great question. So I'll look at it from this approach. So during the 2015 to about 2022 time horizon, growth rates largely decreased, GDP per capita flattened, and this was driven largely by policy missteps, compounded by global economic shocks, some of which were exogenous and some, of course, endogenous. Additionally, we also experienced some monetary and foreign exchange rate policies that perhaps could be argued were a bit opaque or distortive, which more or less eroded confidence in the market. Of course, we also saw fiscal deficits increasing due to lower oil production and, of course, costly subsidies, which fed into electricity, gasoline, or petroleum. And, of course, this kind of more or less, for the most part, overvalued the official exchange rate. So broadly looking at this analysis, you would easily see that over the past decade, Nigeria has undergone some degrees of shocks, which hampered its ability to grow and didn't offer some fiscal space. That said, though, we are currently experiencing a degree of reformation with this new administration on board now. In the last few years, we've observed a lot of reforms. Subsidy has more or less been removed, which has now allowed a bit of transparency in what the price discovery of gasoline at the pump should look like. And of course, with the reforms ongoing, we've also observed internally here, Dangote Refinery, which has more or less allowed for conserving the foreign exchange, that's the dollar, to allow the central bank help support the strength and strengthening the naira. And of course, the Dangote Refinery has also helped the country refine more of its crude internally here and, of course, sell, which allows a natural price discovery, which means that prices naturally become cheaper or more affordable for consumers. So on the one hand, in the past, petrol was highly subsidized. Now it's no longer subsidized. Well, it is in a way, but not as much as it used to be, allowing for transparency in that aspect of the economy. Additionally, I would also look at it from the lens of agriculture. Yes, food inflation has been largely high, and it's still relatively high today as we speak. Notwithstanding, last year or so in March, I think this time last year, they made a call to release about 42,000 metric tons of strategic reserves of inputs, whether it's fertilizer, you name it, for agricultural produce, which has given some elbow room to farmers to allow them to produce more. And of course, when I say endogenous issues, I mean internal issues that hampers growth in agriculture value chain. So insecurity being one of them. So this administration has done some credible work in trying to curtail and remove the level of insecurity the farmers may feel when they go out to the farmlands. So that's also useful too to help drive down prices. But overall, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. We can look at the trade protectionist stance that has increased, even though we are trying to ensure the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement is put to bear. There's still some issues there, which I believe will be sorted out in the near term. I always say Nigeria continues to remain a work in progress and a going concern. And to that end, I still see there's still hope at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, that's brilliant. The removal of the fuel subsidy, plus the ability to now refine oil internally is starting to lower prices, which is actually testament of the story that we talk about from an African perspective, which is that we need to be doing a lot more beneficiation and moving up the value chain. So the Dangote Refinery is one such a case study that we can all learn from.
I agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's something to celebrate about Africa. And I think we should be doing a lot more of that. So talking about that entrepreneurial spirit as well, in Nigeria, SMEs are the backbone of the Nigerian economy, right? 48% or so of GDP, which is quite significant, and employing over 80% of the workforce. But they do struggle mainly with financing, as most SMEs across the world do, regulatory bottlenecks, and access to markets. What is the job that you do on a day-to-day basis as the Development Bank of Nigeria? So what is your primary role in addressing these challenges?
Fantastic question. So what keeps me up at night is largely the challenges faced by micro, small, and medium enterprises. And it has a lot to do with inflation, has a lot to do with the inconsistencies in taxations and policies that hamper their ability to grow. So where I sit, we conduct surveys largely to get the pulse of the ecosystem. What is actually going on? What hurts you folks the most? For example, a survey that was conducted last year by PwC and, of course, the Small and Medium Enterprise Development Agency of Nigeria, they brought out the results, and it showed that access to finance came out tops on their radar as what's hampering growth in the MSME ecosystem. Taxation was there too. Capacity building was there as well. Inconsistency in taxation and government policies. That's another one. Infrastructure deficit, which means epileptic power supply, which means farm-to-market roads not accessible, and so on. So these are the key issues that hamper MSMEs largely. So Now what we do now is to look for ways to advocate on their behalf to ensure they get favorable policies to support their business growth. And this could mean, for example, currently, there's a big tax reform bill going through the National Assembly today. And part of the sweet nuggets coming out of that reform bill is to say that they are basically reducing a lot of the taxes that typically holds SMEs back, and it doesn't allow them to progress. They're simplifying the taxation rules for SMEs. If you're in an infant industry, for example, you get a benefit. If you're in a green industry, for example, you get some benefits there, and so on and so forth. Without going into the details of the policies, but the bottom line here is this. We know intuitively and by empirical evidence has shown that MSMEs are the engine of economic growth. And for Nigeria to thrive, especially the business environment to thrive, MSMEs must take lead. And for them to take lead, we have to ensure that whether it's taxation, whether it's access to finance, making sure they get enough liquidity, enough financial support to scale their business. So right now, there are millions of micro MSMEs in the country, of which 95% of them are actually micro businesses. Just imagine a world where those micro businesses have a view where they can literally scale, where they're going from micro to small to medium before becoming a large conglomerate and so on, like the Aliko Dangotes of the world. So that is, of course, a utopian dream, and that's the journey we hope to see over time. Of course, Rome was not built in a day, but the truth is, when you take a look at the reforms occurring right now, there should be a credible pathway for micro businesses to begin to scale, especially when the government is providing better access to finance for these folks. The Development Bank of Nigeria is doing the same thing too, ensuring these folks get the required financing they need to scale their respective businesses, whether it's in trade, manufacturing, agriculture, and the value chain, healthcare sector, you name it. We want to be able to see folks in this ecosystem scale.
Great. I love the taxation reforms. Those are necessary for any MSME across the world. And so it's really progressive and commendable that you're starting to simplify taxation for small businesses, because it can be quite administrative, but also it does remove the incentive for them to scale. If it's just way too much tax in the beginning. The State of Entrepreneurship report around Nigeria that was released in 2023 that I had an opportunity to look at, and it speaks mainly around entrepreneurial activity. While it did decline in 2023 from 2022, what I found interesting about it was that youth entrepreneurs were creating 70% of new businesses, and also female-led businesses grew faster. They were growing at a faster rate than male-led businesses. In your view, what are the main reasons here? When you think about the instruments that you advance as the Development Bank of Nigeria, how are they female fit, and how are they youth focused to encourage growth in these areas?
That's a fantastic question again, because I say this because we've always argued that women are better with money than men when it comes to managing their business. They're more judicious in repaying, and they tend to want to grow their business faster than men. That's what we've observed. But overall, though, Nigeria is a very youthful population. There are more youth than non-youth in the country. So those numbers, what you're saying doesn't surprise me at all. But more importantly, and this is International Women's Day week for the most part. So we've been celebrating this, and we've observed that a lot of banks, my bank as well, what we do is we create products. We create products that speaks to the needs of the customers, whether it's female sensitive, gender focused products, which basically allows our customer banks, which is other financial institutions, to now co-create products together. And they will now market those products to youth as well as women, which oftentimes can be youth as well. And the idea is to create a theme, whether it's in fashion, whether it's in IT, whether it's in healthcare, whether it's in trade and agriculture and the value chain alike. So we've seen a lot of uptake of funding through that pipeline, because if you have a gender lens, then you will see the opportunities. And what we've observed is that since we know women oftentimes are always anticipating trying to grow their business, we just need to encourage them more. So there are other products that have been created. For instance, partner banks we work with have created this cash flow lending. Some of the challenges youth and women typically face and MSMEs broadly encounter is lack of collateral.
Yes.
What collateral do you have to cover the loan you're trying to assess? So what we've seen is by a collateral-free loan, which is cash flow lending, show us a positive cash flow. So these partner banks will use this product, cash flow lending, to basically attract more of these youth and more of these female-led enterprises and ensure that they grow, because they have advisory along the way too. When they go awry or astray, if you will, the idea is to kind of pull them and navigate them back to stay the course. So there are many products that support women, and there are many products that support the youth. But the major encumbrance for them not accessing credit is a lot to do with not having the right documentation. That's one. Also, not having collateral. Those two things are typically chiefly amongst the issues or the reasons why they can't access credit. Notwithstanding, the idea behind female-led enterprises and youth getting access to credit boils down to having a gender lens, a gender focus, and ensuring you're speaking to the needs of these customers. You have to understand where they're coming from in order to know how to help them. A lot of folks feel if you just create a product, build it, they will come. It doesn't work that way all the time. You have to understand, meet them at their point of need, and you will see them thrive.
Yes. When you look at just young people in general, they don't have collateral. They've not worked. neither do they have the social capital to get somebody to provide them with that collateral. And so I'm really keen to understand from a customer perspective, what are those insights that you then try unpack to figure out how you then support this young person in Nigeria and across Africa? A lot of businesses are still informal. And to the point you made around documentation, and so forth, what is the actual support, the readiness, almost the investment readiness support that you provide these youth-owned businesses, female-owned businesses, but also the studies and the insights, the customer insights that you draw to help you design those financial products?
Fantastic question. So we have a multifaceted approach here at the bank. For example, where my specific job is I like to follow the money. So if we are to lend money out to our partner banks, who in turn lend it to players in the micro, small and medium enterprise ecosystem, we now conduct a monitoring and evaluation. And in that monitoring and evaluation exercise, we get to see the customers and get to hear from them directly what their experiences are with access and credit, what they would like to see going forward. And we take notes of all these things. But more importantly, if we see their struggles, we end up realizing that maybe it could be some capacity building method. So micro enterprises in particular, we've observed that a lot of these folks, they think revenue is profit. Because of that, and you have to kind of retrain and help them understand that accounting and record keeping is important. Access to credit is important. Marketing, risk management, HR, and so on. So we take them through a plethora of different courses. We have an application called BizAid, which takes you through 9 different courses. When we keep on adding more courses as we determine the need. So we take surveys to get a sounding board of what their needs are. We work with expert consultants to essentially ensure that these folks help us and support us in developing these modules and courses fit for purpose. The idea behind this now is ultimately it boils down to one thing. We want to ensure that in the end that we are making sure if you're getting funding, then you want to be armed with the technical capacity to utilize the funds properly. And if you aren't getting funding, you still have the technical competency to know how to use the funding when it comes available to you. So that's capacity building that we ensure. After the capacity building, after the training, of course, we also have advisory sessions. So it's on a case-by-case basis. So some of these business owners, they may want to see you help them or walk them through what a typical day looks like in the office, in their manufacturing plant, in the HR processes, in the operations department, and so on. So we have our consultants who work with these MSMEs typically to go walk them through what they learned in the classroom and now apply it in real life context to see how they can now structure themselves in a way and be consistent enough where they can now begin to see a degree of growth internally as well as externally.
Yeah. Okay. That's incredible. What I find interesting about Nigeria is its growing tech sector. And in fact, a lot of the mobile money and payments businesses that come from Nigeria are actually unicorns, right? So my question to you is, as a development bank, have you ever thought of partnering with these sort of technology businesses to unpack or uncover new insights from your customers or create lending products that are sort of fit for purpose and are embedded in these technology platforms?
That's a good question. I think we have toiled with that idea. Payment service banks, fintechs. In fact, we are actually trying to explore different ways to partner with them to ensure we get the right insights, like you alluded to better understand the ecosystem, to help get money faster in the hands of the right MSMEs. So this is actually something we're toiling with right now. I think it's a fantastic idea, and I think these fintechs are the way of the future. And I think more and more traditional lenders and banks may actually start creating subsidiaries that are fintechs as well to compete.
It's an interesting mix.
Yeah. So I think, that's the natural thing that's a natural process to to take if you want to remain competitive, if you want to remain on top of your game, to say the least. So I think that's something we're looking into, and I think we'll continue to see what type of quick wins we can derive from partnerships of that in that magnitude. But for now, it's still early days. I do believe, though, fintechs are the future. In fact, they're the present.
Technology is definitely an enabler of providing better financial services. But also, we also know that businesses that adopt technology actually do better. And so when you think about it, at least when you go back into the macroeconomic landscape, what are the sort of policies that Nigeria is putting in place to enable access to broadband, or access to digital infrastructure so that there is adoption of technology? What are the different things that the government is thinking about in that sense?
So there's really a big push right now. Like I said earlier, we're going through a degree of reforms, and this reforms cuts across the board, whether it's trying to develop from an infrastructure perspective, meaning roads, bridges, train networks, and so on, or whether it's through ICT infrastructure, broadband, fiber, and so on. So we're looking at 5G, and if you are watching the news, you'll find that whoever has the best type of technology within their jurisdiction will probably lead the future for years to come. I mean technology from the lens of, it could be whether it's payment systems. I grew up largely in the U.S. My education, my upbringing was all in the U.S. And what I've observed in the U.S., even the payment system in the U.S. is still at its infancy. I say this because if you transfer money from your bank account, say Chase, and you transfer to Bank of America, you will get the money the same day. If you use a payment app, you can, whether it's a cash app you use or a Zelle app you use, you can do that. But if you use a traditional banking application in the U.S., you get it in the next 24 to 48 hours, typically.
Yeah.
Here in Nigeria, a typical transaction from an Access Bank or an Echo Bank, name any commercial bank, any microfinance bank, you can transfer money in real time and get it in real time. So in some respects, there's some aspects of financial intermediation happening in Africa that is actually better than the West in some respects.
There's a lot of leapfrogging that's happening.
Yeah. And if you get it right, you lay the groundwork for fiber optics across the country. I think that cuts across many sectors. It's not just ICT, education, agriculture. Everything is impacted just by getting that right. Make things, initially, it might be expensive in the first instance, but it gets cheaper over time. And I believe wholeheartedly that, like here in Nigeria, that's actually the Ministry of Digital Communication, Digital Economy. They're doing a lot of work in that regard, ensuring that the right youth, they want to train 3 million youth and people in the tech space. 3 million, that's impressive.
That's impressive.
They are trying to do this because they know what it means for the country in the medium term. Not only will it help in different sectors of the economy internally, would also support export growth. Whether you export in talent, whether you're attracting foreign companies to come and get your talent here and work remotely from here to achieve the same objective, that matters too. And that's a way to attract revenue that can support local currency and basically the economy largely. So all these things matter. And I believe wholeheartedly that as we progress, as we evolve, as the reforms, kick in, we'll be better for it. But my fear is that historically, I always say past is prologue, not to be Shakespearean or anything like that, but discipline is key in any reformation. Being able to stay the course is without a doubt the most important aspect of any reform. It might feel painful at first, but if you continue to communicate the benefits of this and put, if you will, palliatives in the short term to ensure that the folks at the bottom of the pyramid don't feel left out, don't feel the pinch so much, then you will start seeing the fruits of your labor. And that matters the most. And that's not just Nigeria, that's everywhere in the world, and largely African countries. Because oftentimes when the going gets tough, we say, okay, we've had enough. We're going to go back to what we know. We're no longer going through these reforms and so on. But I think that there's an opportunity here and we need to stay the course.
key things that the Nigerian government needs to focus on to ensure that poverty levels come down as the economy grows.
Right now, since we know we're going through reforms, the moment the president announced when he was inaugurated, subsidy has gone. Immediately, it was almost like a reflex action. We saw prices skyrocket. Fuel prices went up. And whatever happens to fuel prices cuts across through everything in the industry, in the economy, because it filters through transportation costs. It filters through food prices too, because you need to factor in the cost of transportation to build it into the cost of your food you're going to sell in the market. So let me explain something in economic terms. Something we call automatic stabilizers. And automatic stabilizers, from the economic terms, is basically saying at a certain threshold, government and financing and support will kick in to support those at the bottom of the pyramid, those who don't make enough money to make ends meet. So in the US, you have food stamps. Food stamps is basically a card where you can go to a grocery store and buy food that the government helps you finance. So in African countries, what tends to happen is something we call cash transfers, where the government literally transfers funds to your account to support you to make ends meet. Now, the problem with that is that the unavailability of data and probably getting the right people through their bank verification identities and numbers may not be there. So even though those who have bank accounts may benefit from that, quote unquote, not everybody has a bank account. Some people still believe in cash only, where I will save my money under my pillow, as the case may be. So how do you reach those folks? So now there's something you call agency banking, where you have different agents go to different rural communities, making announcements, sounding the alarm, come register. That way you can have access to financial instruments, if you will. And that's helpful too. But the idea generally is the government, and I think they're working on this already, because I remember I read somewhere the Minister of Finance speaking to this a bit, that they're working on ensuring that there are palliatives and support mechanisms for folks who are having a tough time during this reformation period, which, if you're speaking to this, at least one would believe they're actively working on getting solutions to ensure that folks who are, struggling get some level of comfort.
I get that, and I think it's an important intervention. I do worry about what does that mean. What are the investments then that the country is making into education, healthcare, for example? That's also part and parcel of driving poverty. And so, what has been done in that space as well to make sure that it's not just the short term sort of intervention that takes center stage, but it's also the long term investment in human capital.
That's a fantastic question. So I'll look at it from this lens. A lot of people will always point to the president as the source of their problems. Oftentimes you look to the state. It's not the president, it's the state. Charity begins at home. So you look at the local government, then you look at the state government. Because for primary education and healthcare, the federal government relies on the state to do their bit. So from that level, we can go down to the local government and see what the local government chairman or mayors, if you like, what are they doing to support their people, their citizens in their local communities, with providing them with the access to quality education, ensuring that it's mandatory for every child of age to be able to have access to quality education from day one all the way through 12th grade, if you like. And I can speak on a state I'm familiar with. Abia State is a state where the governor there has made it mandatory for every child to go to school, from elementary school, from first grade all the way to 12th grade. And it's going to be for free. They're going to foot the bill for it. So there's every incentive now for you to go to school. It's important. And you actually be punished. There'll be consequences if you don't key into this. And that's absolutely useful, because if we say the children are our future, or the future, if you like, we want to have an educated future. We want to be able to demonstrate that these children who are the future can actually ensure that, they will be able to cater to the future problems of the world and so on. But at the state level, that's where the rubber really meets the road. They're the ones responsible for ensuring that they can fend for their citizens at the local level. Healthcare and education are key. You take away health, take away education, you've killed a generation.
So, what are the things that you think can be done to strengthen those sort of governments at the local level and the state level? I can share a bit about here in my own country, how some of those, at least from a state, a local government perspective, there are many challenges there, and don't always have the best person running the local government portfolio, don't always have the right skills, don't always have the right capacity. So, in your view, what are some of the things that we can do to strengthen
local government autonomy? Give them autonomy, true fiscal autonomy at the local level, because they're the folks who know exactly where the pains are of their people. They know the different homes, different communities. They know exactly who lives where and how they can solve their individual unique problems. So if you give them autonomy, I think they'll be held accountable. And that matters the most. And make sure they're elected officials, not appointed officials. That way, if they're not doing what they're supposed to do, they get booted right out. But what's important here is give them autonomy. Because in some instances, you have the state funding respective local governments. If I don't like the local government head there, I won't provide the necessary funding there, which is not right. The idea is they should be funded directly and they should be allowed to operate autonomously, independently, without fear of retribution from any external party, because they should know where the pain is for their people, healthcare and education.
With that, having shared that, what are your top 3 recommendations for driving inclusive economic growth in the MSME space, in MSME development in Nigeria, and ultimately such that it actually starts to also contribute towards reducing poverty and getting all these wonderful benefits that we all need in Nigeria?
I'll be as simplistic as possible because it's important. Mean what you're saying and say what you mean. Be consistent in your messaging and show actionable steps in actually achieving the milestones you set out in the onset, and communicate this. Continue to communicate to your constituents. Tell them what you're doing, why it's taking so long, or why things are getting better, or why things aren't getting better. Constant communication matters. That way people feel like they're being carried along. That matters. Consistency in policy is sacrosanct. If you continue to change policies in the short run because it's not working after it was passed in 3 months' time, and you change it, then you never know when any policy is ever going to work. Sometimes when you do policy assessment, it takes longer because there's a lag, and that matters. So sometimes you have to just sit down for a bit, let the policy play out for a while, and see if you can tweak things here and there to improve it, not necessarily scrap it and revert back to status quo ante. So that's 2. 3, I would say the youth they're more youth than non-youth. And if you look at Africa's history, you've seen, at least since the 60s and 70s, even 80s, and in some countries today, you see the youth, younger generation, meaning you could be in your 30s and you're the head of state. And I think if you have, I'm not suggesting older leaders don't know or don't understand, but I think if you focus on the future, which means ensuring that those who are to lead in the future pay attention to them today, your country will be better for it for the long run. So have the mindset that these folks who are considered youth, 18 to maybe 35 years old, are considered youth in a lot of countries. Focus on them. I'm not saying discount other age brackets, but if you focus on them and they're the most populated segment, focus on them. And I guarantee you will see your country take off. That matters because these folks have great ideas. They have the energy. They have the drive. They have the entrepreneurial spirit. Focus on them and you see how far your country can go in a very short period of time. That matters. And I'm saying this as somebody who's not even in its age bracket.
You're not, but that matters. We should be focusing on the youth. We have the youngest population in the world. And so it would really be a pity to not realize that as a dividend, a few years from now. But Prof. Nnanna, thank you so much for joining us today. Your insights into Nigeria's economic journey, challenges, entrepreneurship, and financing has really been insightful. It's really been valuable. And so I just want to thank you for your contribution.
Thank you for having me.